And so what happens on earth is we have all of these external influences powering and affecting us emotionally. And what I would like to do is say to you that these external influences will greatly determine whether you desire to progress or not on earth with regard to the divine love path. So let's have a look at what some of the influences are. If we look at our environment, the first set of primary influences upon us in terms of external to us are usually our family. Now, very recently I gave a talk about the human soul, and I called it Emotions, Truth and Families. And one of the reasons why I gave that talk was to show you how the family influences you in terms of holding you in a place of not wanting to progress. Now, I'm not saying that families are a bad thing. What I'm saying is, and let's clarify it, what I'm saying is if the family is going to be one of the greatest impediments to you growing away from the same condition that they're in. So, for example, here I am, here's my father, here's my mother. Where did most of my emotional injuries come from? Right, so most of my emotional injuries come from them and also, of course, my environment, right? So we've got all of the environmental factors, of which my parents, or lack of parents, was a major factor in creating my emotional injuries. So let's say I want to deal with one of those injuries. Let's say I want to deal with one of those injuries. Let's say the injury is Dad's an atheist and Mum's an agnostic. You know what I mean by agnostic? A person who doesn't know what they believe about the spirit world and about God. So Dad's an atheist, in other words, he's a firm believer there is no God. And Mum's an agnostic, and she doesn't know what to believe, whether God exists, not exists, doesn't really know, the jury's out for her. So what emotions are going to be in me? Like, I'm going to have some emotions, aren't I, about, does God exist, does God not exist, maybe God doesn't exist like Dad says, and Dad comes up with all these arguments about religion, of course, because many atheists have become atheists because of religion, let's face it. And so, I've got all of this anti-religion stuff going on inside of me as well, emotionally, right? So let's say I've got so I finish up having an anti-God stance, and I finish up also feeling anti-religion, but I can't spell religion, anti-religion, now I can't, yeah. So I've got an anti-God, anti-religion stance, and I can't, and let's say I want to resolve this, like I want to resolve what's going on inside of me emotionally about all that. What's going to happen is, not only do I have to now resolve the emotion that's inside of myself about it, so my own doubts about God, my own anger and maybe rage and different emotions that I have towards religion, but now I've also got the weight of Dad's projections about all of those things affecting me too. Does that make sense? So not only do I have my own emotions to deal with, but I also have my dad's emotions to deal with in the process. So can you imagine now I start suspecting that there's a God? All right? Just my suspicions alone are going to trigger my father, are they not? All right? What's he going to start feeling? Well, he's going to start feeling his authority is being confronted. He's been through this same process that I'm going through now. I should just accept the fact that there's no God, and he's proven that already, and so forth, right? So he's going to have quite a lot of different emotions in response to my feeling there may be a God. Right? Now, unless my father is able to own completely all of his own emotions without projecting a single one of them onto me, can you see I'm going to have some opposition from my father on that matter, quite simply. Now, my father has the choice to not do that. He has the choice. He could just say to himself, all right, my son's an intelligent man, my son knows what he's doing, I've brought him up to know what he's doing and trust that he's brought him up to know what he's doing. And so therefore, if my son wants to go off on this discovery tour, I could help him. But there's not too many parents that do that, let's face it. Now, it would be lovely if they did, right? Because that would actually be an act of love, and that would then mean that the family wouldn't be one of the things opposing your discovery of truth, right? But unfortunately what happens is the family has an emotional investment in these things. For example, the father may have had some very negative experiences with religion, for example. Emotional experiences that he hasn't ever released inside of himself. So when you start talking about God, he automatically associates God with religion. And where's he going with this now emotionally? Now there's all these emotions about religion that he starts feeling that are unresolved inside of him, that he's unwilling to completely feel by himself without expressing them back to you. And so now he's projecting at his son that unless you have an anti-religion stance, you're not my son anymore. And that is an opposition to you growing in truth and coming to your own state about whether you believe, you know, you should have anti-religion stance or not. And this will apply to anti-God stance, and it applies to all sorts of things, right down to your viewpoint of the opposite gender. Like if Dad thinks, well, women need to be put down and kept barefoot and pregnant, right? Then as soon as I start challenging that emotion in myself, because it's going to reside in myself if it's in my father most probably, or the opposite emotion may reside there too. But if I start challenging that emotion, one of the first persons I'm going to start challenging is my father. And of course, if he doesn't want to deal with the hurt from his own past about why he believes that, then of course we're going to be in disagreement with each other again. Now, none of that needs to happen, does it? We don't need to be enemies with our own family. Our family doesn't need to be enemies with us. In fact, if we were all in a state of love, that would never occur. However, unfortunately, because my family has an emotional investment generally in me maintaining the same emotions and same beliefs that my family has, often this occurs. So the family then becomes one of the primary points of opposition for us emotionally. So what happens is as soon as I start to think about different truth, I often start to get quite strong attacks, emotional attacks from my family, right, as a result of that.